ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Frisbie, the professor of chemistry at Norwich University. For those of you not totally familiar with Vermont, it's about an hour south of here. So he's come up to join us today and tell you a little bit about the work he's been doing over the past few years, past few decades maybe. So I'll let him introduce himself some more, but let's give him a round of welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you for letting me come to your campus and share my experiences with you. Welcome to Drinking Water, Naturally Occurring Metals, and Global Health. This has been a collaboration for many years with many people. I want to start with a history of drinking water. Since the beginning of human history, until very recently, we have only used surface or dug well water for drinking. This started to change in 1862 when the tube well was invented by Colonel Nelson Green from the Union Army. He used steel, which was recently made very inexpensive by the Bessemer process in 1855. And he was motivated by John Snow's discovery of the cholera in the drinking water in Soho, London in 1854. And as a soldier in the Union Army, he was motivated to keep his troops healthy while they lived in concentrated encampments. And he did this by driving this new material, steel, deep into the ground to access microbially safe groundwater for drinking. And today, billions of people use deep well water for drinking. Our original source of drinking water, what we evolved drinking, is surface water and dug well water. Dug well water is simply a hole in the ground until you hit the water table. But it often has microorganisms that can make a person sick hours or days after drinking. So it's very easy to link drinking the water to the illness. Surface water and dug well water also have high concentrations of dissolved oxygen, and ions are removed by leaching from the surface to lower levels in the aquifer. And what happens is the surface water tends to have low concentrations of especially arsenic, manganese, iron, and other metals as well. In contrast, this new source of drinking water that's only been available for about 150 years, deep well water, rarely has pathogenic microorganisms. However, unlike surface water, it has low dissolved oxygen, and the accumulation of ions from leaching gives deep well water high concentrations of arsenic, manganese, and other metals that can make a person sick after years or decades of regular drinking. The diagnosis of chronic metal poisoning is made difficult by this 5 to 20 or more years of exposure needed to produce symptoms. So those are our two major sources of drinking water today. This graph suggests that arsenic is released from solids to deep well water by low dissolved oxygen under reducing conditions, if you're familiar with the chemical term. In the 1880s, tube wells were first used in northern Argentina, and in 1916, about 30 years later, a very alert doctor, Dr. Abel Ayerza, found that both people and their chickens had symptoms similar to pharmaceutical arsenic poisoning. This is a picture from 1918 of a man with the common symptom melanosis of the chest, and a picture of a chicken also with a similar skin disorder. Later, Ayerza checked things in common between people and chickens in this village and found arsenic in the drinking water. And at that time, arsenic was a commonly used pharmaceutical, so doctors were very aware of the symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning. Now I'd like to give a history of drinking water in Bangladesh. This is where I've done the majority of my work. This is a hospital that I've worked in. Rivers, ponds, and dug wells were the only practical source of drinking water for all of Bangladesh's history until the 1970s. A massive cholera outbreak began in 1963. Many premature deaths were caused by drinking surface water. And if you can imagine, the life expectancy during the mid-1960s was only 46 years old because so many young children died prematurely. In response to contaminated surface and dug well water, the world community began to install about 10 million of these hand pump wells since Bangladesh became independent in 1971, with the idea of supplying microbially safe groundwater for drinking. Sounds like a good idea, right? Deep well water doesn't have microorganisms. Many children are dying from cholera. So let's access this new source of drinking water. And within one generation, the entire population of Bangladesh changed from drinking surface water to drinking groundwater. By the year 2000, approximately 97% of Bangladeshis drank tube well water. This is a picture of a woman. She's pumping water from a deep water well into a clay pot for drinking, but she's surrounded by all this water. And what happens in Bangladesh for about 2 months of every year, about a third of the land is flooded. And she cannot use this surface water for drinking because it's microbially unsafe. If you have any questions, speak up. The symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking water usually take 5 to 20 years to manifest. Chronic arsenic poisoning from drinking tube well water was first diagnosed in 1993. This is a 23-year-old male from a study area. He has melanosis of the chest. Okay. You can see thousands of little white spots where he's lost his brown pigment. This is melanosis. It's not cancer, it's not melanoma, but it's heading towards skin cancer. Very easy to see. This is the first common symptom of chronic arsenic poisoning, melanosis of the chest. The second common symptom that you'll see is keratosis of the palms. This is a very advanced case. Keratosis of the palms is essentially extra layers of dead skin on the palms of people's hands. This person does have cancer. This is a carcinoma in the heel of his hand, and he's lost a finger to gangrene. The third and final common symptom is keratosis of the feet. Just like on the palms of the hands, essentially extra layers of dead skin on the bottoms of people's feet. This is a 44-year-old female from our study area. In addition, you'll occasionally see black foot disease. This is a vascular disease. What's happening in this 12-year-old girl's body is the veins and arteries throughout her whole body are leaking blood. So the circulation from her lowest extremity, her feet, back to her heart is very, very poor. And you can see she has all these necrotic lesions that are subject to gangrene, infection and gangrene. It is inevitable this 12-year-old girl must have her feet amputated. What I'd like to do now is pause our PowerPoint. And I want to show a 7-minute video that was made by the Discovery Channel that features the medical expert of our team, Dr. Bidhendra Sharkar. And it shows him working in Bangladesh in 1997 when I started working in Bangladesh. At this time, we didn't know each other, but our paths crossed, and he's been a very powerful and important colleague in helping to understand and solve many of these problems.
Arsenic poisoning was only discovered in Bangladesh recently. But scientists already know that pockets of contamination stretch across most of the country. The tragedy that's unfolding in Bangladesh may be even greater than in India. This has become the biggest poisoning in history. The news trickling out of Bangladesh has caught the attention of one of the world's experts on diseases caused by metals in Toronto. Dr. Bibhutendra Sarkar is a top researcher at the Hospital for Sick Children, and he teaches nearby at the University of Toronto. He's about to travel to Bangladesh to see this massive metal poisoning firsthand. Sarkar is about to begin a week-long journey into remote villages of Bangladesh, and Discovery Channel is joining him. He arrives in Dhaka, the capital of the country, and is taken to a small decrepit hospital downtown. That's where he's welcomed by two men who have been instrumental in uncovering the extent of the poisoning here. Most of the research on arsenic in Bangladesh has been done at this privately run hospital, even though it has little money and no equipment to even test the water samples. Most remote villages you can only reach by foot. Arsenic was discovered in the drinking water of this village 2 years ago. The first person we meet is a mother who sings a song of mourning. Her son just died of cancer. He had telltale signs of arsenic poisoning. In the early stages, arsenic poisoning can be tricky to detect. The skin either turns spotty or blackish. Arsenic accumulates in a protein in the skin. It slowly poisons the tissue until the cell can no longer carry on its normal activities, and the skin color changes. If people keep drinking arsenic for more than 10 years, the skin on the feet and hands deforms.
I have never seen anything quite like this.
By this time, so much arsenic has accumulated in the tissue that growth stops. These are the final external signs of a deadly buildup of arsenic inside. At this point, the poisoning cannot be reversed, and victims feel no pain until it finally hurts to stand. The team travels to half a dozen villages a day. Local doctors and villagers direct us to areas where people are sick. In the most contaminated villages, about a third of adults show symptoms. The children are also being poisoned, but few show the signs.
This is the smallest child that I've seen in this region who has come down with arsenic poisoning. He has melanosis on his trunk. And how old are you? I mean, don't boys go to. He's only 8 years old, and so this is not spread yet on his palms. Now, this sort of situation, if it is, if this child is careful not to drink arsenic-contaminated water, it is reversible. But if he continues to drink arsenic-containing water, this will get worse from melanosis to spotty to finally to gangrene, and he's such a small little boy.
This boy was likely ingesting arsenic since he was a baby. Sarkar says he seems malnourished. It's hard to know how many others are dying or have died from arsenic poisoning. Eventually, it affects every part of the body, mutating cells inside the body and outside. Ultimately, chronic poisoning leads to lung or stomach or some other cancer, so the victims are impossible to track. We visit another village late one afternoon where the dilemma over what to do is apparent. The doctors from Dhaka are the first outside experts to visit here. As they have in dozens of other villages, the team takes hair, nail, urine, and water samples. Because arsenic collects in a protein in the hair and nails, doctors can analyze how much is in a villager's body, even if they're not showing signs. Many here are sick.
Oh, this is worse one I have seen.
The official responsible for water quality in this village tells Sarkar he doesn't know what to do. He's afraid to tell people to switch back to surface water because of disease. After 5 days in the villages, it's hard to come to grips with the numbers of people poisoned and the sheer span of time it took to do something. Perhaps arsenic just kills too slowly. It'll never grab the headlines or generate urgency like a sudden disaster. Rather, this kind of tragedy catches authorities off guard when something meant to help turns harmful. On the ferry home, we cross the Ganges, or Padma River as it's called in Bangladesh. The government in India plans to pump water from the Ganges to its villages, then build water treatment plants. It's an $800 million plan. On a more personal level, Dr. Sarkar is also struggling to come to terms with what he's seen in Bangladesh. He's the expert from Toronto.
I thought that I knew so much I can help. But here I come to a situation, first of all, the number of patients are such huge. The suffering is so much. I feel that all the knowledge that I have acquired over the years, I cannot apply it here. I know so little, and I cannot do anything. And yet I thought that I know so much, and I feel very humble.
In the medical world Dr. Sarkar is familiar with, so much is done to save just one life. He studies metal-related diseases that may affect only a few dozen people.
It hurts me because in my own work, so much money is being spent in research. In my whole work, I have probably spent several millions of dollars. We have so much luxury, and they just don't have the bare necessity of life, clean drinking water. That is what it boils down to. They don't have clean drinking water.
So that's the dilemma. In an effort to prevent extraordinary rates of infant mortality from cholera and other fatal diseases, the world community installed 10 million hand pump wells to access microbially safe well water, but they didn't test for any naturally occurring toxic metals. I'm very proud to say that our team made the first national scale map of arsenic concentration in Bangladesh's tube well water. We did this in 1997. And this map shows that approximately 75 million Bangladeshis are at risk from a variety of cancers and vascular diseases caused by chronic arsenic poisoning. It turns out that the source of this arsenic is geological. Any geologists here? Environmental science? Great, okay. Okay, so. This is the Ganges River. This is the Brahmaputra. And over here is the Meghna. These sediments have washed from the Himalaya. Yes, a question.
Hi, yes. Hi. I did have a question when we were watching the video. How you said how we discover metals in the water. How do we know what's identified as clean drinking water? Isn't there different vitamins and nutrients in clean drinking water?
Yeah.
Do we have a baseline of what clean drinking water is compared to finding the metals in this water you're talking about?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it kind of goes back to the difference between the two sources of water that we've drunk as a species. And it turns out that, there are 74 elements in the Earth's crust, right? And basically, what we drink is filtered mud. So the elements that are in the Earth's crust are expected to be found in drinking water. But because the deep well water is low in dissolved oxygen, some metals are reduced, which makes them more soluble. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end, but that's a really good question. Did I answer you okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Please speak up. Okay, these sediments have washed down from the Himalaya mountains for countless years. And if you think about it, if you want to have a gold mine, you go to the mountains, right? What happened was, as the Earth was cooling, the more dense elements sunk deeper into the Earth's crust as the crust froze. And these huge uplifts from mountains give us access to these more dense metals like gold, and unfortunately arsenic or manganese as well. All set?
Isn't manganese good for like cows or something in like small amounts?
That's a great question. I think I might wait to the end on that because I was talking to Dr. Tartanton. This whole research of ours has gone in a very unexpected direction. Please bring that up at the end, okay? So I'm going to put you to work now. We wanted to make sure that our laboratory in Bangladesh was providing us with accurate data. So we did several tests. The first test is called independent standard recovery. And if we put pure arsenic in pure laboratory distilled water, we're able to measure 83% of that arsenic. Similarly, if we take pure ferrous iron and add that to pure laboratory water, we're able to recover 93% of that ferrous iron. And that's good. That's as good as any laboratory in the world can do. We're doing this with 40-year-old equipment. There are wonderfully skilled scientists in Bangladesh working with very limited resources. Now we had a second test. This is called sample matrix spike recovery. If we took pure arsenic and didn't add it to pure distilled laboratory water, but added it to a sample of drinking well water, we recover 89%. Again, as good as any laboratory in the world, but here's a result that changed my life. Look, we can add pure ferrous iron to pure laboratory distilled water and recover it all, 93%. But if we add pure ferrous iron to a sample of drinking water, we can only recover 34%. Why? And I don't want to put any pressure on you, but your answer affects the lives of 90 million people. Most audiences don't get this, but don't be afraid. Give it a crack. Yes?
I was moving my hair.
Oh. I would too, but there isn't much left. What's the difference between these two types of water? Laboratory water versus groundwater?
Isn't laboratory water like purified?
Definitely, yeah. We want to make sure our laboratory water doesn't have any arsenic if we're trying to measure arsenic, or ferrous iron if we're measuring ferrous iron. Essentially pure H2O. You're on the right track. Can you go take the next step? What's going on with drinking well water?
It's dirty.
It's not purified. It has things dissolved in. Like I said, there are, I forgot, like 74 chemical elements in the Earth's crust. So we would expect to find up to 74 different elements in drinking water. This suggests that there's another element in Bangladesh's drinking water that's preventing us from measuring ferrous iron. It's called an interference. Now, we didn't have the resources to find out what this was in 1997, but we did the next best thing. We went to the library, like any good student should, and we found out that the elements that do this, the metals that do this, are very often toxic. And then we mapped the locations where we observe this on a map of Bangladesh. And everywhere you see a capital E is a place in Bangladesh that had this trouble measuring ferrous iron. And this was the first evidence that another toxic element besides arsenic was found in Bangladesh's drinking well water. You had your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, so what would you say is considered more healthy, the tap water or like the purified water that's in the lab for the human?
Yeah. Great question. What's more healthy, purified water in a lab or tap water? Well, it depends on the tap water, but in Bangladesh, if I could, I would drink distilled water, but in the field, I have to drink what everyone else is drinking. Yes, a question.
What was the lesser of two evils between the other metal you found and the arsenic water?
Oh. These are great students. You can come to Norwich University if you want. Sorry for saying that, but these are wonderful questions. Yeah, what is more problematic, arsenic or manganese? Definitely arsenic. Very potent carcinogen. But what we have found out is that manganese is also a very potent neurotoxin. And when you ask your question at the end, we'll talk about that in more detail. Oh, she has another question now.
I have a couple questions. I was wondering if you worry for yourself and your own health when you're in Bangladesh researching and you have to drink the water there?
Yeah. How safe is it to work in Bangladesh when you drink the water? My wife almost died of diarrheal disease. It was the worst night of my life. Regardless, if we don't do this work, we can't help lots of people. So we consider this an acceptable risk.
And my other question is, could you talk a little more about the ferrous ion and why you're researching it? I'm just kind of confused about it.
Okay, yeah. Why do we care about ferrous iron? Because at this time, no one was sure what the source of arsenic was. And the geologist that I was working with thought that ferrous iron would be very important for him to understand what might be a likely source of arsenic in Bangladesh's drinking water. It turns out that arsenic, manganese, and iron all behave chemically the same. They're insoluble, not found in drinking water at high dissolved oxygen concentrations, and they're soluble in the absence of dissolved oxygen, which is what's going on with this new source of drinking water that many of us drink. Okay. Great questions, thank you. In addition, early onset of chronic arsenic poisoning suggests that multi-metal health effects are possible. So this problem of measuring ferrous iron and total iron accurately and very advanced symptoms. This is an 18-month-old female with the advanced symptom of keratosis of the palms. The medical expert, Dr. Sarkar, thought that there was something else in Bangladesh's water that was enhancing the toxicity of arsenic. Oh my goodness, yes.
Since you said that was an 18-month-old, can it be passed through breast milk as well?
Can arsenic be passed through breast milk? Definitely. Okay, very good. Excellent questions. Thank you. Don't be shy. Why am I here? Okay. I am here because there are many important and difficult problems that we need to solve as a society, and we need highly trained, hard-working scientists to help us get these answers. And I hope you will take up the challenge. Okay, so what we did was we did a second national scale sampling, and instead of doing the analytical work in Bangladesh, we sent them to the University of Bordeaux. And what we found is that 60% of Bangladesh's area contains groundwater with manganese concentrations greater than the WHO drinking water guideline. Manganese in children, manganese in drinking water is associated with IQ deficits, learning disabilities, and behavioral problems, ADHD, many things. And that's going to tie into your question at the end. We also found about 3% of Bangladesh's area has unsafe concentrations of lead in their drinking water. About 1% have unsafe concentrations of nickel, and about 1% have unsafe concentrations of chromium. So the message here, this all came from working in the laboratory and finding out that we could not measure iron accurately. That led us to believe that there is at least one other chemical in Bangladesh's drinking well water that was toxic, but not arsenic. Arsenic doesn't cause that trouble with measuring iron, okay? And by being astute and careful, we discovered that over 90 million people in Bangladesh are drinking water with unsafe concentrations of manganese, lead, nickel, or chromium. Okay.
What is a hepatotoxin?
Liver. Hepatotoxic, toxic to the liver. Okay. So tens of millions of Bangladeshis are drinking water that exceeds the WHO health-based guidelines for arsenic, manganese, lead, nickel, and chromium. In addition, subsequent work has found unsafe concentrations of boron, barium, molybdenum, and uranium above WHO health-based guidelines in Bangladesh. The three big actors in Bangladesh are arsenic, manganese, and uranium. These other elements are only occasionally found. Okay. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about climate change. Most of Bangladesh is less than 12 meters above sea level. In a normal monsoon season, 1/3 of the cultivated land is flooded with a mixture of fresh and salt water. The fresh water comes down the Ganges and the Brahmaputra and mixes with the ocean water in the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal. And like I said, about 1/3 of the country is underwater for about 2 months of every year. Bangladesh has an area about equal to Wisconsin, but a population comparable in size to the United States. So if you can imagine everybody in the United States jammed into the size of an area of Wisconsin, and then for 2 months, 1/3 of that area is underwater, you get to understand the population density and pressures in Bangladesh. We suspect that flooding will likely increase the concentrations of arsenic, manganese, and other metals by creating a reducing environment. As the water floods and the water level rises, it's harder for oxygen from the atmosphere to dissolve in water and travel a greater distance deeper into the aquifer to prevent this release of arsenic and manganese. And also, the sodium chloride in salt water will enhance the release of arsenic into Bangladesh's drinking water, we hypothesize. And we actually have some evidence to show this. This graph suggests that arsenic is released from solids to Bangladesh's groundwater by reduction. So on the left here, okay. We have higher arsenic concentrations under reducing conditions, which means in the absence of dissolved oxygen. dissolved oxygen is the dominant oxidizing agent in water. If so, it's likely that flooding would also release a wide variety of other ions into groundwater by creating this reducing environment. Look at these two maps. On the left is a map of arsenic concentration, and on the right is a map of chloride concentration. Okay, where am I? Here is the Indian Ocean. Okay. So as flooding occurs, the salt water advances northward. Okay. And you can see that in the coastal areas of Bangladesh, there are high chloride concentrations and high arsenic concentrations. There's this hot spot near Feni, which is right here. And there's these three iron islands of high concentration in the north. Here's the third, kind of matching this, this, and this. What we suspect arsenic in the environment, it's analogous to phosphate. It's an oxyanion, except there's an insoluble form, arsenate, like phosphate, and the reduced soluble form, arsenite. They're negatively charged, and we suspect that they're displaced from positively charged locations on solid surfaces by the chloride. So it's likely that saltwater intrusion will also release a wide variety of other ions into groundwater, both by anion and cation exchange. Okay, so let's try to solve this problem, okay? On the left is a map of the average concentration of arsenic in each village. So this is data from 1997. We went to about 120 villages, and we sampled about 5 different wells in each village. And this is the average amount of arsenic in each village. The map on the right is a map of the minimum amount of arsenic we found in each village. It's the map of the cleanest, the safest wells. How can you use this information to provide safe drinking water to 85% of the people in Bangladesh?
Well, like, you would think you could just send them to go to the cleanest one, but then I guess if there's that many people, because it's kind of overpopulated there, they're gonna, like, they're gonna take all that water. So is there, like, a good treatment for arsenic where you could go to the ones that have a lot of arsenic and treat the arsenic or not? Or is that just too much money to do?
You're on the right track. Let's think about this. So anything that's colored blue is unsafe. So we have this 15% of Bangladesh's area on the right. Okay, like in here. So this is a map of the safest wells in Bangladesh. Are there any safe wells in this 15% of Bangladesh? Yes or no? Correct. No, I see you're nodding your head. Yeah, so 15% of Bangladesh do not have water below the Bangladeshi national drinking water standard. What about all this white area? Oh, there's wells there for sure. 85% of Bangladesh has at least one well in each village that is safe. Yeah.
You said they were overpopulated, right?
Yep. Yeah. So as a result of this discovery, groundwater testing has become a major component of an overall strategy to provide safe drinking water to the people of Bangladesh. There's an army of technicians with portable field test kits, and they're testing every well in Bangladesh. Half the people are illiterate, so you have to communicate the results to them. If the water is dangerous, the well is painted red and people avoid it. If the well has arsenic concentration less than the 50 part per billion national standard, it's painted green and people are encouraged to share it. Simple, quick, cheap solution, appropriate for a resource-poor country with a high degree of illiteracy. And that came from those two maps. Okay? I'm not done putting you on the hook. Okay. Let me explain this graph. Everywhere we found a very deep well next to a shallow well, we sampled both wells. So let me draw the profile. That's the ground surface. Here's a shallow well, and that's the data on the y-axis. Now, and there's the adjacent deep well. How can you use this data to help find safer drinking water in some locations in Bangladesh? And I'm going to give you a little hint. There's one cluster of data that looks like a straight line with a slope of 1. Right there. And then there's other data that are almost vertical. Any ideas? Yeah, sure. We have only a few brave souls.
Me?
Yeah, you bet. You're brave.
Okay. Does sampling the two different ones, the difference is to see if the water is safer deeper into the earth?
Yeah, okay. Okay, let's build on that. Okay, so here's our two wells. Let's suppose that the shallow well has 0.2 milligrams of arsenic per liter. And the deeper well has 0.2 milligrams per liter. Is that going to fall on that line with a slope of 1, or is it going to be on the vertical part of the data? On the line. If there's 0.2 in the shallow well and 0.2 in the deep well, it will be on this line, slope of 1. And that says that the arsenic-containing mineral is very thick in that region. You can't drill underneath it. How about the vertical line on the left? Okay. What's safer here, the shallow wells or the deep wells? The deep wells. You can drill under the arsenic in some parts of Bangladesh.
So isn't that kind of like the question in the video? Didn't it say, do they want to keep using the deep wells or like going to shallow ones where there's microbes in there? So what's like the lesser two evils, I guess, to address that, like arsenic or microbes?
Yeah, it depends on where on this graph you are. Some parts of Bangladesh, it doesn't matter how shallow or deep the well is, you're going to get about the same amount of arsenic. Other places, there's much more arsenic in a shallow well, which of course is cheaper, easier, and quicker to drill than in deeper wells, which are harder, slower, and more costly to drill. Okay, that's good. We're helping some of those people in that 15% of Bangladesh that can't find any safe wells in their villages, right? And here's a drilling operation in Bangladesh. It's called drive and wash. Okay. There are also simple treatment systems. We found this one by accident. This was a water storage tank in a rural area of Bangladesh. And in Bangladesh, there's not enough electricity for the whole country at nighttime. So at nighttime, what happens is the electricity is diverted to the capital, and the outlying regions have no electricity. So what was happening in this village was just before dark, they would run an electric pump and fill up a water storage tank. And it would settle overnight, wouldn't get disturbed by turbulence, by fresh water being pumped in. And look what happens. It has 160 part per billion arsenic coming into the tank. Where are you? And an undetectable amount leaving the tank. Overnight, it's allowed to react with the oxygen in the air. So does the iron, much more iron than arsenic. Both become insoluble, and as the iron settles, arsenic absorbs to that, and the arsenic settles as well. So this is actually a pretty simple treatment system. Another thing people do is take like 1 gallon water jugs, fill them up with water, put them out in the sun, open to the air, and then they pour the water off the top and don't drink the water at the bottom where some minerals have settled. You know, low-tech, inexpensive, appropriate for an illiterate population. This is my godson, and this is a water treatment system installed by a German NGO. Very complicated, and what happens with these is they get forgotten, they're not maintained, and they eventually fail. So we like simple systems like testing and using ambient oxygen in the atmosphere to reduce arsenic concentrations, something that will last. Okay, ready to leave Bangladesh, on to India? Geology doesn't care about political boundaries, right? So what we did was we went to the west, to the left of Bangladesh, into adjacent West Bengal, India. It was long known that there was an arsenic problem there, but we're also interested in what other non-arsenic metals might be in West Bengal's drinking well water. And we found unsafe concentrations of arsenic, of course, no surprise, but also boron, fluoride, manganese, and possibly thorium. I'm going to say possibly thorium because there's no WHO guideline for us to look up and say, oh, this amount's safe, this much is dangerous. We'll talk about that in a minute. Then we went to the right of Bangladesh, to the east of Bangladesh, to Myanmar. You might know this country as Burma. And no surprise, we found unsafe concentrations of arsenic, fluoride, manganese, and uranium. And right now we're finishing a project in Nepal, which is in the Himalaya, the source of the sediment that's causing all this trouble. And unsafe concentrations of many things: aluminum, arsenic, iron, manganese, and mercury. Looking at the big picture, this rapid switch to deep well water is exposing hundreds of millions of people in South Asia to unsafe concentrations of metal. This has been called the largest mass poisoning in history. You can see the Himalayas up in Nepal and Bhutan. The arsenic-containing minerals from the eastern drainage basin of the Himalaya through northeast India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, all the way to Vietnam. This is about a quarter of the world's population have this problem. So wouldn't it have been so easily avoided if they simply tested the water for naturally occurring toxic metals before installing hundreds of millions of wells throughout the region?
Yeah, why didn't they? Were they just trying to be
they didn't know. This idea of a new source of drinking water being chemically different because it's deep in the aquifer wasn't thought of. My brilliant wife actually came up with that idea. I see the trees, she sees the forest. Okay, I got some challenges for you. There are 76 elements in the Earth's crust. The WHO only has drinking water guidelines for 14 of them. So this is the stuff that we expect to find in drinking well water. I mentioned thorium. Okay. Right there. There's more thorium in the Earth's crust than uranium or arsenic. We know that thorium causes liver cancer in humans by injection. In the 1950s, when we were enamored with nuclear energy, people were using thorium dioxide, thoracil, as an imaging agent for X-rays. And what's that?
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. This is when X-rays X-ray imaging was still evolving, and they would inject people with thorium dioxide, thoracil was the name of the drug, to get better pictures of healthy livers. Unfortunately, this causes liver cancer, but we have these really great pictures of these healthy livers.
We're still healthy.
Yeah, so, there's a lot of work to be done here. Any one of you could take an element or two and make a career out of this. Okay, I have another challenge for you. Bangladesh, India, many low-income countries use a 50 part per billion drinking water standard for arsenic. And we now know that at 50 part per billion over a lifetime, this will cause 1 extra cancer death for every 81 people. The United States, the World Health Organization, the European Union have a 10 part per billion drinking water standard. So my first question, and there's a good answer to this, how come people from poor countries get to drink water with 5 times the amount of arsenic as people with rich countries? There's actually a really good answer. Any idea? You're brave, I like it. Yeah. Oh, how about the new brave person in the back?
I guess this is probably very wrong, but location in geography, because I know a lot of communities nestled between mountains are poor because they don't have access to a lot of things. So I'm wondering if that's the same concept.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Investment.
You're getting close.
I have kind of 2 ideas. I was thinking one, since the poor countries seem to be more populated, they think it's maybe, this is kind of a mean idea, but they think it's they're more expendable, I guess, and it would solve our overpopulation problem. I just think they don't really care about those people as much.
Yeah. I hope you're wrong, but that's a really good, thought-provoking idea. The answer is the poor countries don't, it goes with your investment ideas, the poor countries don't have the $25,000 atomic absorption spectrophotometers that are required to measure down to 10. They can't set a standard at something lower than they can see. So, they use a standard that's based on spectrophotometry. You need a much more inexpensive instrument that's affordable and more common in these countries. So they can't measure any lower. That's the trouble. I'm glad to say that's changed. We developed a spectrophotometric method and a spectrophotometer that works as well as commercial instruments costing between $2,300 and $7,500. A spectrophotometer costs $64. And now these countries can measure down to less than the 10 part per billion WHO guideline. They can go as low as 7 part per billion. And in Bangladesh alone, that's supposed to prevent about 120,000 cancer deaths just by identifying safer water to drink and share. Okay, so that's one challenge. Now think about this. The WHO says that, and the United States government says that 10 is the maximum. Okay, but they also say 0.17 causes an unacceptable risk of death from skin cancer. The WHO. How come the WHO says you can drink up to 10, but at 0.17 you have an unacceptable risk of death? Any idea? There's a good answer for this. It's very close to the previous answer that we had. No one can measure that low. We're very close at Norwich to developing an instrument that can go down to 0.004. I've been working on this for 17 years. It cost about $12,000. There is a $600,000 instrument that can go down to this level, but obviously that's something that is not readily affordable. So here's a whole nother challenge for you. And more important, if you become a doctor or something like that, and you're given a number and says, oh, over 50 is of concern, ask where that 50 came from. That's not written in stone, okay? That was a product of an evaluation. And as you can see, many low-income countries use a 50 part per billion drinking water standard. That's based on detection limits in routine testing laboratories from 1952 to 1971. Damn, we can do so much better now, even with spectrophotometry. Okay, in our country, the WHO, our drinking water standard is 10 part per billion. That's based on detection limits from 1971 to 1993. Let's go back to that previous class. At 10 part per billion, if someone was to drink that water over a lifetime, we would expect 1 extra cancer death per 400 people. It would be considered unacceptable. Holland has lowered their drinking water standard to 1 because they can measure that low. We can measure that low today. But what happens is these laws get set in stone and people forget the scientific basis. Science continues to advance, which is great, and we're not that good at having our laws continue to advance at the pace of science. What a challenge for anyone in this room. Okay, so this is a global map that we're working on. We found the drinking water standards for over 170 countries, and 36% of these use the 50 part per billion standard, and 61% use the 10 part per billion standard. And there's no reason why all countries, both low income and high income, can't use a more protective standard. We can all measure to lower levels with the equipment that we already have. Third challenge. Okay, the eastern drainage basin of the Himalaya, arsenic, right? Northeast India, southern China, Myanmar, Southeast Asia, all the way to Vietnam. We are just discovering that the western drainage basin of the Himalaya, the Indus River Valley, has high concentrations of uranium. We're working in Karnataka with the Indian Institute of Science from Bangalore. 2 part per billion would be considered safe. They have 1,442 part per billion. And there's no spectrophotometric method for measuring that. We're trying to develop one at Norwich. So there's lots for you to do. But what we need are highly trained, hardworking, motivated scientists to tackle these challenges. And I challenge you to enter that group. With that, I'll, if I haven't taken too much time, I'll gladly handle any questions or try to handle any questions you might have.
Did you still want me to ask that question?
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So think of that map for manganese. Let me go back. Okay, so we discovered that 60% of Bangladesh's area, about 90 million people, were drinking water with manganese above the WHO drinking water guideline. That drinking water guideline does not protect public health. It's based on a dietary survey, a 3-day dietary survey of 100 Canadian women from a university. It didn't measure any health outcomes. It was the best data they had to attempt to design a drinking water standard for manganese. So what happened was the world community said, okay, is there any harm in Bangladesh from so many people drinking this drinking water? Gail Wasserman from Columbia University found out that the children in Bangladesh have lower IQ scores the more manganese that they're exposed to in drinking water. And that led to an explosion of research over the last 20 years about the neurodevelopmental problems associated with excess manganese in children. What we did, again, my brilliant wife's idea, we did an exposure assessment for manganese in infant formula. There are products sold in the United States that have 1,000 times the amount of manganese that's in breast milk. Europe, there's no maximum limit in the United States. The minimum is 5 times breast milk. In Europe, the minimum is breast milk, and the maximum is about 100 times breast milk. We now know that these concentrations will cause a variety of neurodevelopmental problems in certainly laboratory animals. We see no need to wait for the data on infants because there's essentially no harm of manganese deficiency. The good news is that the government of Canada has passed a law to protect infants from excess manganese. And the World Health Organization has just passed, is in the process of issuing a guideline, they can't pass laws, to protect infants from manganese. So if anyone has a child, read, breast milk is the best, for sure. If you have to feed infant formula, look at the label and avoid any chemical forms of manganese. The 4 are manganese citrate, manganese glutamate, manganese chloride, manganese sulfite. And they tend to have the highest concentrations of manganese. So do soy and rice-based infant formulas. Dairy infant formulas without supplemental manganese have the lowest concentrations of manganese. So University of Montreal is doing a retrospective study of neurodevelopmental problems on infants, but there's no need to wait for the data. There's no harm in protecting kids against excess manganese. It's associated with a whole long list of neurodevelopmental problems, from IQ deficit to behavioral problems to ADHD. That law was written 41 years ago, and the Infant Formula Act of 1980, and has not kept pace with science, just like the arsenic standards and manganese standards in this PowerPoint. So do you have any doubt that you can have an exciting and rewarding career making the world a better place for everybody? But you need to have the training. You need people like Dr. Tartanton to help you gain the skills that you will need to be able to contribute successfully. And I hope each one of you rise to the challenge. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wondering like how you got here today. Like what was like your background info, kind of like what colleges and all that did you go to?
My training?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a fan of the physical sciences. Can I give a motivational story? In addition to the one I just gave. Neither of my parents finished high school, okay? I was slated to work in the family plumbing business, which I hated. I was 5 years out of high school, and I had a ceiling collapse on me. I could not walk for 3 days. I was temporarily paralyzed, and I have a lifetime disability from that injury. I was in chronic pain for 8 months. I told my dad, Dad, I'm going to quit the family plumbing business, go to college, and pay for it myself. What did he do? He threw me out of the house, even though I was in chronic pain and I lived in a tent. I applied for college. I used my girlfriend's mailing address for my college applications. This is pre-internet. And I ended up going to my state school, University of Massachusetts at Amherst. I knew I wanted to study science. What was the first exam that I failed? My math was rusty, my language was rusty. I was out of high school for 5 years. What was the first exam that I failed? I'm a chemist, there's a hint. Chemistry, right? And I said to myself, chemistry is hard, but it seems important. And if I can do well at something that's hard, that's important, that not a lot of people can do, I can probably make a good living for myself. I worked very, very hard. I graduated in the top 12 of 4,500 at UMass. I went on to Cornell for my master's and PhD. And that intense training prepared me for this type of a challenge. You're young, you can take it. You can take the bruises. It's not your job to bruise them. Any other questions? We'll push you down. Your job is to get up.
This might be personal, but I hate sad endings. Do you ever talk to your dad again?
Oh yeah. Yeah. How can I say? My father has since passed away. I'm an old man myself, but yeah, everything worked out. He finally understood why I did what I did. He was a very proud man. He was a World War II Marine, a veteran of Iwo Jima. He saw things that 18-year-old children shouldn't see.
So you were mentioning how your wife really asks the important questions and she notices a lot of things. Did you meet her through your research?
This is good. Okay, this is about motivation. How did I meet my wife? When I was a freshman at the University of Massachusetts, I could only afford the 10-meal plan. So I couldn't afford to buy too much food on the weekends. I wouldn't steal either. So on Friday nights in the dining hall, I would gorge myself. And she'd say, what's going on? I used to be handsome. What's going on with that really handsome guy? And she found out that I didn't have money for food on the weekends. I would drink tea on the weekends and eat the tea bags. That's how much I wanted an education. I had no choice. I could not go back to heavy labor, okay? I'm pretty fit for a 63-year-old guy. I mean, I have to be. If I don't, I'm in pain. I still see a doctor about once a month for this injury that happened 40 years ago. I see a chiropractor. But she started bringing food to my dorm room on Saturday nights and said, I'm going to marry that woman. And it turns out that she's an amazingly bright person. She also got her PhD from Cornell. And I'm really good at seeing the trees. She's really good at seeing the big picture, and that's happened over and over. It makes us a very good team.
You sound like an angel. That's so sweet of her to do. No wonder you married her.
I'm really lucky I married my best friend. Scientists are human, too.
I feel like we really know you.
Yeah. Good.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for your attention, and I hope you learned a lot today. And feel free, if you have any last comments for Dr. Frisbie, feel free to come down and introduce yourself. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.
I love working with students. I wouldn't be here if I didn't.